Oh, how's everybody doing today? It is Friday. The weekend is here. It's about 7:45 in the morning West Coast time. And I took kind of a mental health day off of making videos yesterday. And but there are a couple of stories that I wanted to talk to. I think the most important one for me yesterday, for the first time, a federal judge in Brownsville, Texas, who was appointed to the bench by Donald Trump, issued a very clear, very striking, very logical, very evidence-based ruling that the Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport people is illegal. First time a federal court has said that. And it takes these things a little while to get through the courts. But so, for context, on March 15th, Donald Trump issued a proclamation, which is similar to an executive order. He issued a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act. And immediately that day started using the authority given to the President of the United States under that statute, because that's what it is. It's a statute. The Alien Enemies Act is a statute, which, when it is invoked, it broadens the powers of the president to deport alien enemies from the United States. Previously, there's a lot of history in this ruling. Previously, the Alien Enemies Act has been invoked in the United States 3 times: during the War of 1812, during World War I, and World War II. What do those 3 things have in common? That's right, war. A formal declaration of war had been issued by the United States Congress prior to all 3 of those invocations of the Alien Enemies Act. The requirements of the Alien Enemies Act, in order for it to be invoked in a manner that is consistent with the requirements of the statute, it requires that the United States be in a state of war, which Congress has the power to declare war. Currently, Congress has not declared war against anybody. Or alternative number 2, that a foreign government has declared war against the United States and has embarked on an invasion of the United States. Historically, that involves a government directing its military. In his March 15th proclamation, Donald Trump so this order was issued yesterday out of Brownsville, Texas, May 1st, 2025. It is an order from Judge Fernando Rodriguez Jr., United States District Judge in the Southern District of Texas. It's an easy order to read. There's nothing super tricky about it, because the scope of it is, you've invoked this statute. What does this statute require? Have you met the requirements of this statute? No, you have not. That's it. It's 36 pages, but that's the meat of it right there. The judge. So Trump's proclamation on March 15th said that we are being invaded by a foreign nation, by a foreign country, the foreign country of Venezuela. He says that Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan street gang, who does have a presence in the United States, he said that they are being directed by and they are coordinating with the government of Venezuela, such that this street gang, Tren de Aragua, is functioning as the de facto military of Venezuela at the direction of the Venezuelan president, President Maduro. And, spoiler alert, the judge in this case was like, you don't have it. No. No. You haven't met your burden in proving that that's actually true. And again, the judge goes into history, the judge goes into context, and says this current proclamation and what you are alleging in this proclamation, you're not disputing that the United States has not issued a formal declaration of war against any nation. Nobody's disputing that because that's up to Congress, and Congress hasn't done that. Congress has not declared war against Venezuela. They just haven't. That leaves the only other opportunity or the only other choice under this statute of being the United States is being invaded by another foreign country's military at the direction of that country's president or ruler. And this judge was like, you don't have that either. You haven't met that either. So the language of the statute: when there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion, we're going to talk about those two phrases here in a moment, is perpetrated, attempted, yada, yada, yada. The president makes public proclamation of the event. All native citizens, denizens, or subject of the hostile nation or government, being of the age of 14 years old and upward, who shall be within the United States and not actually naturalized, shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. That's the first part. And so again, it's like the language of the statute is super clear. If we're at war or if we're being invaded by a military directed by a foreign government, and that's just simply not the case here. And in some of the history, the court goes through, they're talking about this thing called TCOs, transnational criminal organizations. Think like drug cartels, or is like the closest thing for that. And it turns out that in 2017, the Treasury Department designated one guy as a foreign narcotics trafficker under the Kingpin Act in coordination with this transnational or transactional criminal organizations. And that guy was the then vice president of Venezuela. So in 2017, the vice president of Venezuela was running a drug cartel as well. So, which again, I'm not really making any commentary on Venezuela as a country. If memory serves, I think their current president basically stole the last election, Maduro. So Venezuela's got some problems going on. But, Trump issues this proclamation on March 15th that says, Tren de Aragua is a transactional criminal organization. They're conducting irregular warfare and undertaking hostile action against the United States. Tren de Aragua operates in conjunction with a cartel in Venezuela and the Nicolas Maduro regime-sponsored narco-terrorism enterprise based in Venezuela, and that they continue to engage in mass illegal immigration into the United States to further its objectives of harming United States citizens. Tren de Aragua is closely aligned with and has indeed infiltrated the Maduro regime, including its military and law enforcement apparatuses, and some other context as well, and lays out some further allegations along those lines. And then Trump concluded his proclamation with, I find and declare that Tren de Aragua is perpetrating, attempting, and threatening an invasion or predatory incursion against the territory of the United States. Tren de Aragua is undertaking hostile actions and conducting irregular warfare against the territory of the United States, both directly and at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. And So this particular case came up. There are 3 men being held in Brownsville, Texas, or in that district. That because how it works, then it's like Trump gathers up all of these people and then designates a bunch of them as being deported pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. And it's been his position throughout this whole thing that by invoking the Alien Enemies Act, that gives him the right to sidestep all due process rights that these people would have. Because the other opportunity would be to deport them under just regular immigration laws. And they get all kinds of due process if you're being deported under those statutes. So that's why Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act, because he thought that it gave him a route to bypass all of the due process rights of these people that on March 15th he shipped over to El Salvador. A unanimous decision from the Supreme Court a couple weeks ago was like, no, you don't get to do that. And then there was a 7-2 decision. I'm mixing them up, but at a minimum, a 7-2 Supreme Court vote was like, even if you're deporting people under the Alien Enemies Act, they still have due process rights because they're still present on U.S. soil at that time. And so Trump has been ignoring that. He's been ignoring that. And so there's a whole bunch of history and context and analysis here. So petitioners, the 3 guys who filed this motion through their counsel, seek habeas relief by challenging the president's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act on 3 grounds. First, they contend the proclamation fails to provide petitioners with reasonable notice and meaningful opportunity to challenge their designation as alien enemies, due process. Second, they argue the proclamation does not fall within the statutory bounds of the Alien Enemies Act, both because no invasion or predatory incursion has occurred or been threatened, and no foreign nation or government has engaged in such conduct. Bingo. Third, petitioners claim the proclamation violates the specific protections that Congress established under the INA, the Immigration Naturalization Act, for non-citizens seeking humanitarian protection. Because all 3 of these guys had either filed or were in the process of filing asylum claims because they were afraid of being persecuted in Venezuela. So again, it's like, and this government took them to El Salvador. Yeah, whatever. Then there's a lot of discussion about whether the court can even hear this case because of whether or not it's a political question. Because you heard Marco Rubio in the Oval Office the other day, somebody asked him about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and he's like, I'm not going to tell you. And he's like, and I'm also not going to tell a judge because the executive branch conducts foreign policy, and we don't do it in public, and I'm not telling you, and I'm not telling a judge. And which he's partially right on that. However, the courts always have jurisdiction over interpreting statutory language and whether or not a statute was invoked properly in accordance with the language of the statute. The court won't address why a specific statute was invoked because that is a political question. That's left up to the executive branch. But the courts do have the ability to review circumstances to find out whether or not the executive branch has complied with the language of the statute when they invoke that statute. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're dealing with here. So there's a bunch of discussion about political question and all of that stuff. And the court says, the allegation is that Trump's proclamation includes insufficient language to substantiate that they have fully complied with the statute because they haven't provided the evidence. They haven't provided any evidence that Tren de Aragua is operating as an arm of the Venezuelan government itself, as opposed to just being street gang members who showed up in the United States and started criming. And there's some stuff about notice, because again, originally going back to Trump thinking that invoking this statute gets him out of all due process requirements. The Trump administration, I almost always slip up and call the Trump administration the Trump organization. A little Freudian slip there. Trump and his people were saying, because we've invoked the Alien Enemies Act, we only have to give people 12 hours notice if they're being deported pursuant to the Alien Enemies Act. And they were giving them notice in English, and none of these guys read English. They weren't giving them any opportunity to contest their designation as alien enemies, and they weren't providing them with any information as to how they could challenge that designation. And the court was like, that notice is inadequate. And so then there's a big discussion about the definition of the word invasion and the phrase predatory incursion. And I love these kinds of discussions because it's like the court ping-pongs back and forth between, well, let's look it up in the dictionary. And then they're like, well, let's look those phrases up in dictionaries that existed when the statute was written in 1798. And they're like, okay, well, and what have these phrases meant relative to this statute over the last 200 years? And so it's an interesting discussion, but, it's a little nerdy, I guess I'd put it that way. And then the court applies its conclusions, or applies its conclusions to the statute itself. And says, the proclamation declares that the country of Venezuela, through President Maduro, directs and controls the actions and activities of Tren de Aragua in the United States. And the court is like, you've not provided anybody with any evidence that has actually occurred. And as a result, the court concludes that the proclamation places responsibility for Tren de Aragua's actions in the United States on the Venezuelan government, which, if that were true, would satisfy that first prong. So then, based on the plain, ordinary meaning of the terms invasion and predatory incursion, the court concludes the factual statements do not support that has actually occurred. The proclamation makes no reference to and in no manner suggests that a threat exists of an organized, armed group of individuals entering the United States at the direction of Venezuela to conquer the country or assume control over a portion of the nation. Thus, the proclamation's language cannot be read as describing conduct that falls within the meaning of invasion for purposes of the Alien Enemies Act. As for predatory incursion, the proclamation does not describe an armed group of individuals entering the United States as an organized unit to attack a city, a coastal town, or other defined geographical area with the purpose of plundering or destroying property and lives. While the proclamation references that Tren de Aragua members have harmed lives in the United States and engaged in crime, the proclamation does not suggest that they have done so through an organized armed attack or that Venezuela has threatened or attempted such an attack through members of Tren de Aragua. As a result, the proclamation also falls short of describing a predatory incursion as that concept was understood at the time of the Alien Enemies Act enactment in 1798. For these reasons, the court concludes that the president's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act through the proclamation exceeds the scope of the statute and, as a result, is unlawful. Bingo. The government does not possess the lawful authority under the Alien Enemies Act based on the proclamation to detain Venezuelan aliens, transfer them within the United States, or remove them from the country. and the judge shot it down. A Trump-appointed judge said that Donald Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans to El Salvador is illegal. So, I very much enjoyed reading that decision yesterday, and I hope that explanation helps. If you like this video, please click like, leave a comment, subscribe to my page, yada, yada, yada. You know the drill. Thanks, guys. Have a great Friday and a great weekend. Be safe.